What's up, guys? Hope you're doing well. Hey, sorry my past couple of videos have been abruptly cut off before my happy sign-off. One time my phone overheated, and another time it was a storage issue, and so just here we are, you know. Good thing I'm still at 49 subs, because once we hit 50, guys, we're never looking back. That's when I bring out the mic, and hopefully you don't hear as much truck noise in the background. I want to share another way that God helped me get free from my addiction to pornography. And I'm just so thankful, guys. So thankful to be free. It's just worth it to be free. Oh, life is, it's like not even the same life. It's just so much better. So if you're in the right of this, keep going in the fight. Don't give up, because it's worth it on the other side. But one thing that God helped me with, or a breakthrough, I guess you could say, is big picture, like temptation theology, the way that I viewed temptation. And I think when it comes to the wisdom of man, we think like, man, if I can just never be tempted to sin, then therefore I can overcome the sin. You know, like, it kind of goes back to another video I made about, you know, building fences around fences. You know, like if I can just avoid going to blank environment or scenario, then maybe I can avoid this. Let me figure out what are my triggers, you know, and man, if I can just fight there to where I'm not triggered, then I won't fall into this sin. That was a accountability tactic I was really familiar with, and I think it wasn't incredibly helpful. Although Jesus taught us to pray, like asking the Father to not lead us into temptation. So of course we're not trying to seek out temptation. We're not trying to intentionally be tempted for temptation's sake. But this theology of temptation being so scary and we should avoid it and just don't be triggered and like try to get away from tempting scenarios, like that's not what the Lord's Prayer instructed. It does not say, Lord, help me to run away from temptation. It's like, no, just lead me not into it. Like, I'm not afraid of it, but as I follow you, God, would your leadership over my life be a pure leadership in paths of life and of righteousness. God, would I not follow you in such a way that I am led into temptation? It's almost like affirming God's character, because that's not what he's going to do anyways, you know? But it's neither here nor there. A couple things that helped me break down my falsely inflated view of temptation, like this: temptation's bad, it's scary, avoid it at all costs, try to get away from it. Again, I'm saying that mindset is unhealthy. It contributed to a longer period of addiction. It did not ever lead to a breakthrough that got me out of addiction. And it's a very human-based way to approach the situation. And like I've already shared, a purely human effort is not going to get you out of this sin. At least it didn't for me. And if it does for you, you're a much more impressive human than I am. But here's a couple things that broke down my false temptation theology. One is that in the Garden of Eden, where there's not yet been any sin, there's no, there's nothing wrong with the world. It's God creating this garden that literally Eden means pleasure. Like, if you went to a building in New York City and the title of it was Garden of Pleasure, it probably would not look like what God intended. You know, like anyways, I don't have to go down that rabbit trail right now. But this pleasurable place, and then there's this one tree called the tree of knowledge of good and evil that God tells Adam and Eve, you can't eat from this tree. Here's what's interesting regarding this temptation narrative that I'm narrating for you guys, and that is that it says clearly that God placed the tree in the middle of the garden. The one thing they weren't allowed to do, God placed it in the middle, in the center. What does that mean? Maybe nothing, but if God followed our human way of processing temptation, like we would expect him to put it in the far corner where it's very hard to get to. Like, just, hey, there's one thing you can't do, but hey, just live a life that doesn't even overlap with that thing, and then you just won't even miss it. You know, you won't even want to do it. Just put yourself in an environment that fully saturates the positive choices and you know, the positive mindsets and the life you want to live. Just create that and cut out all the bad stuff. Hey, you got a toxic relationship, just get it out of your life. Just anyone that keeps you down, anything that slows you down, just cut it all out. You know, and construct this little insulated life from the things that tempt you. That's not what God did, right? He put it in the middle. So what's the reality? Hey, you're gonna see this every single day. Hey, you're gonna have this opportunity every single day. Hey, I will lead you in life and righteousness, but you're gonna have to lean into me. You're gonna have to ask me for help. You're gonna have to actually follow my lead, because just your lead, you're probably gonna bite that fruit one day here, sooner or later. You know, because it's always there. You know. And so this is just one point, but it was a helpful biblical example for me of like, wait a minute, God doesn't process temptation the way that we process temptation as it relates to how much of it should we experience, and just how do we approach it. Are we afraid of it? Do we try to avoid it? Or do we embrace it? Not trying to fill ourselves with it, but just acknowledge it as a reality of life that the enemy tempts. That's like welcome to earth. And if you're going to try to create a world where that feels untrue, even though you think you're creating a paradise, you're actually creating something that's evil, like something that God did not intend. It's a lie to think that, oh, there is no temptation. And so if you try to create a life that tricks yourself into believing a lie, well, the father of lies is the devil. You know, like you're on the wrong team if you're doing that. And you know, the more powerful choice, again, is to know that you can sin, to know that you have the opportunity to sin, to acknowledge that temptation is there, but to not choose it. So we're not trying to avoid temptation at all costs. A couple other biblical things that help me with that. One is when Jesus is talking to Peter, and it's kind of it's an interesting verse, but he says, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." That verse, for the longest time, I read it like, upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of heaven will not be overcome by hell. Doesn't sound as good, right? But we hear, oh, the gates of hell will not prevail against it, and immediately we think, oh, the church is going to be protected, darkness isn't going to overcome me. Like, oh wow, I can be safe in God, even though there are evil forces in this world, and etc., etc. That's awesome, but that's not what that verse is saying. The verse saying the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. What does that mean? Is the church on defense or offense? It's on offense. It's laying siege against the fort that is defended by gates. That is hell. Like, it's not our gates. We're not worried about, oh, the enemy's coming to get us, and oh man, the kingdom of darkness is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and thankfully we have these gates of heaven and we'll be safe in here. Again, tying it to this temptation narrative, it's like, oh, we're not supposed to just live in a little holy bubble and try to evade all the bad things out there. It's like, no, actually put on your helmet of salvation, grab your shield of faith, get the belt of truth and the sword of righteousness. I don't know. Sorry, I don't know them all. Breastplate of righteousness. Is it just sword of the Spirit? I don't know. Sandals ready for peace and things. Anyways, like, get your armor on and go fight. We are on the attack. And so as it relates to temptation, it's like, wait a minute, if we are going to assault the gates of hell, like if we are the light that is meant to expose evil in the earth, to establish justice, to bring forth an advancing kingdom that that goes against the kingdom of darkness, not just defends itself, not just protects itself, but is overcoming territories previously, inhabited by the evil one, then guess what? If the evil one is a liar and a tempter, we're gonna be tempted, right? Like, it's just this different narrative from hide from temptation to, hey, it's okay if you experience temptation. It's kind of like not that big a deal because it's not going to overcome you. Like, versus if you think the kingdom of darkness is more powerful, then you try to just bury your head in the dirt and act like it doesn't exist out there, because that once it comes to find you, you're dead. But if you know that you're the more powerful one, then you can walk around the earth like a ogre, just like take whatever you want. It's all yours, because there's no force out there more powerful than God, So anyways, you're on the offense. You're not afraid of interacting with something that could tempt you. Hopefully that's making sense. Similarly, and maybe I'll end it here and pick up tomorrow, but it's just a clarity that to be tempted is not sin. Like, it is not sinning to be tempted. It is the reality of life. And I think it's Hebrews 4 that talks about how we have a great high priest who is not unable to sympathize or to empathize with our weakness, but rather one who was tempted in every way just as we are, yet was without sin. And it's talking about Jesus, our great high priest. And that couldn't be more clear, right? Like, Jesus was tempted in every way. Every temptation that we as humans face, Jesus was tempted by the same things, and yet he did not sin. So, one, it means, hey, you can overcome temptation. So don't be so scared of it. Like, he was tempted in every single, there are things I'm not tempted by. All right? I've not been particularly tempted. I don't have to go on all these anyways. But Jesus was tempted in every way because he embodied sin. He took it all, upon himself on the cross. And I'm sure he was tempted in many more ways before the cross as well. We know for sure that he was before he started his ministry, when he went into the desert for 40 days and the devil himself shows up. It's like, hello? Like, he was tempted. but he didn't sin. And so to be tempted is not to sin. Sometimes when I was addicted to pornography, as soon as I would get tempted, I would feel so discouraged that I was even tempted. And I would just kind of beat myself up a little bit. And I would also feel powerless. Like, again, the building fences around fences. Like, man, I've already gotten triggered. I've already, allowed my mind to wander in this way. I've already been tempted. And so it's inevitable. Like, I'm going to end up choosing this sin sooner or later. Hopefully I can push it off as long as I can. Maybe I can make it a few more hours. Maybe I can make it a whole day or even 2. But like, at some point I'm going to fall to this temptation because it's latched onto me. And once it's here, it's not going to go away until I choose this sin. That's how I used to process this. But the reality is, no, everyone is tempted, including Jesus himself. And just because you're tempted doesn't mean you have to go choose that sin. It just means the devil's still out there, and that's part of why we're longing for Jesus' return, to throw that guy in the lake of fire forever. It's going to be awesome. But the encouraging part is, even though he is still active, his authority has already been stripped. Like, Jesus going to hell and coming out, like, with the keys, like, it cemented his authority over the devil. And so he's still doing stuff, but he doesn't have permission to necessarily. He doesn't have the authority to, he doesn't have the power to enforce his evil kingdom. All he can really do is trick people into submission to him. But if you don't submit to him, if you have an insurrection against him, he will get out of the way. Not without a fight necessarily, and I'm not trying to make this too ethereal, but the reality is we have authority to overcome every single temptation, and just because you're tempted doesn't mean it's sinning. And so it's not so scary, right? Like, it's just temptation. It's what all of humanity's experienced forever, and not all of humans forever have been addicted to pornography, right? So like, there's a way to overcome, and I'm telling you, it's just one example. Like, man, I haven't watched pornography in 8.5 years, and I'm super thankful, and I'm not going to in the next 8.5. In Jesus' name, Lord, be with me, because I can't do it, right? It's not a testimony of my strength. It's just little pieces of revelation of who God is that opened my eyes, expanded my heart, set me free, changed who I am in the best way. And I'll keep sharing more bits and pieces. But hey, that's it for today. Hopefully you're getting this point, and there's more I could share. But a big bad temptation, scary, run away from it theology is probably going to keep you enslaved to sin for a long, long time. But when you realize that it's a fact of life, it's a reality, God himself put the tree in the middle of the garden. Like, it's not something you need to run away from. It's something you're actually supposed to come against on the attack, trusting in God's leadership to lead you away from, or to help you navigate through this ministry of reconciliation, this interaction with the darkness, with evil, in a way that we can be ministers of light and not be overcome by temptation, not be led into the temptation, but to just be led as the light. And so it's not easy necessarily, but avoiding temptation certainly is not the life God's called us to live. Hopefully that's freeing for you. That's all I got for y'all today. I'll talk to y'all soon. Life is worship. God is love.